Hi, in this video we will learn to apply the Modus Tollens rule. Hi, this is Logic Self-Taught with Dr. Phi. In this video we will learn how to apply and how not to apply Modus Tollens. In a separate video there are examples of proofs with the rule. Like Modus Ponens, Modus Tollens allows us to use information contained in a conditional. We have to have a conditional on its own line. We need to have the negation of its consequent also on its own line. And with these two propositions given already in the proof, we are allowed to infer the negation of the antecedent of the conditional. Let's look at the rule in symbols. We have our conditional if P then R. We have the negation of the consequent, not R, on its own line. And the rule tells us you may infer the negation of the antecedent. It's important to remember about the negation, right? The negation needs to be added to the antecedent. The rule is intuitive, as the following examples illustrate. If Jane gets 94 points on the test, she'll get an A. She did not get an A, so she did not get 94 points on the test. If it snows, then it's cloudy. It's not cloudy, so it doesn't snow. It's important not to confuse Modus Ponens with Modus Tollens. Both allow us to use information in a conditional. Modus Ponens tells us, look, you need to have the antecedent and you're allowed to detach the consequent. Modus Tollens, on the other hand, requires that we have the negation of the consequent. That's important, the consequent. And we are then allowed to derive the negation of the antecedent. And we have to remember that we'll be sticking the negation in front of the proposition that is the antecedent. To apply Modus Tollens, we must have a conditional on its own line. We have one here in line 1. We must have the negation of its consequent on another line, and we have one here in line 2. So we are allowed to infer the negation of the antecedent, which will physically involve our actually writing the negation in. Here's a more complex case, but the same principle applies. We have the conditional. We have the negation of the consequent. We are therefore allowed to infer the negation of the antecedent. If the antecedent is complex, we of course embrace it in parentheses. Here we have an application of Modus Tollens. We have a conditional in line 1. The negation of the antecedent of the conditional is derived, not A, in line 3. The question is, what must be given in line 2 in order for the application of Modus Tollens to be correct? Well, we need to have the negation of the consequent. So we need to have tilde, and whatever the consequent is, here the consequence is tilde b. Right? So we have to have a double negation here. Consider the following example. Again, we have a conditional. We have the negation of the consequent, tilde c, and what we derive is a negation of whatever the antecedent is. Here the antecedent is a negation, so we derive a double negation. How about the following application of Modus Tollens? We are given a conditional, and then we are given, well, a kind of negation of the consequent, and we derive the negation of the antecedent. Well, that's not allowed because we must be given a formula that contains the tilde in front of whatever the consequent is. Here we have another misapplication of Modus Tollens. Here what is derived is not the negation of the antecedent, so that again is a misapplication of the rule. The same problem applies here. In this case, we might be tempted to apply modus tollens if we focus on proposition in line 1 and a component of proposition in line 2. But as you remember, inference rules don't apply to proposition components, and in fact what we are given in line 2 is not a negation, it's a disjunction. Here again, modus tollens is, as it were, applied, but only to a component of the proposition in line 1. And again, the proposition in line 1 here is not a conditional, it's a disjunction. If we change the example so that we have a conditional in line 1, there is still a problem. We are still applying modus tollens to the conditional that is a component in line 1. What's wrong with this example? If you look carefully, you'll see that we have a conditional in line 1, but we do not have the negation of the consequent of that conditional in line 2. What we have is the negation of the antecedent of that conditional, and that's not what the rule tells us we must have. So be careful about what the antecedent is, what the consequent is, and remember about the two different rules, modus tollens, modus ponens. Modus ponens, for its application, requires that you have the antecedent but not negate it. Modus tollens requires that you have the negation of the consequent. This is Logic Self-Taught. It's exercise time. Do all the exercises until they feel like a breeze.